Content warning. This episode includes discussion of domestic violence. After you've been parenting for more than a few years, there's something you learn. The way you communicate with your child changes as the child gets older. When you say something to a toddler, you don't usually need to provide all the logic and reasoning with it. At that stage, they're absorbing information like a sponge, and you're the primary source of all the new knowledge. But when they get to the teenage years, it's a different story. At that point, they might question your advice. So a lot of times, as a parent of a teenager, you might find yourself walking that thin line. You don't want to just tell them what to do with the "because I said so" logic, because that could just push them farther in the wrong direction. But you also don't want to see them make a big mistake that could have serious consequences. That's kind of the spot Heidi was in with her daughter Emali. Emali was with a boy, and Heidi was trying to get her to understand that he was not the one for her. He was controlling and abusive. Emali did realize that eventually, but when she tried to leave, she sadly didn't make it. So Heidi's telling the story of her daughter Emali, who she sometimes refers to by her middle name, Renee, so that others might recognize that situation earlier and get away. Real people in unreal situations.
There is a girl hanging by her broken leg from the telephone wire.
And I called 911 and I said, I found a baby.
I turned around. I see a gun pointed at me close enough I could touch it.
She would hold our heads underwater all the time.
He levels the gun, pulls the trigger, and I go down.
Her eyes were full of tears. She didn't want to leave us.
My hair catches on fire.
I swear to God, this image is burned in my head for the rest of my life.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? Heidi loves to talk about her daughter, Emali.
She was a fantastic mother. Raising Emali was a lot of fun. She was very strong-willed. When she had something in her head, she had to get to it. She had to get straight, like exactly what she was thinking in her brain. And there was no getting her off track. There was no derailing her thought process. She was a young mom. She was 15 when she got pregnant. She was 16 when the baby was born. She had postpartum depression, so we got that taken care of. I did allow her to drop out of high school because she had to take care of herself. Her mental health and her baby were more important than her education at that point. And then she ended up going back to school and graduating early and getting her CNA license. And she kicked off her career running with her CNA. She worked for Clover and she worked for a CNA agency, and she absolutely loved her job. She loved her clients. She loved her patients. She loved her coworkers.
Then Emali met a boy, Tyson.
My first impression of him and his mother was it was off-putting. Emali wanted to go hang out with him, so I drove her over because she wasn't old enough to drive. And I wanted to make sure that his mother was home. And so I asked to meet her, and she just came to the banister of the porch because they had the house that they were living in at the time. You had to walk up like probably 20 steps, and there was like a porch. She came out to the banister of the porch. I introduced myself. She introduced herself. I was like, all right, just nice to meet you. Just want to make sure that you're here. I want to make sure that your kid doesn't get my daughter pregnant, making it like a joke. And she's like, oh, no, they're good. They're good. I'm here. I'm working on the computer. And I was like, all right. And he didn't really say anything to me. He just kind of like stood there and like looked at me. They're supposed to go to the apple orchard, and I checked her location one time, like a little bit later, just to kind of check up on her. And she was still at the house. So I texted her. And I asked why she was still at the house. And she said that they had left to go to the apple orchard, but then they had to go back because they had to get milk for his little sister or something. And I told her I didn't like that. So I wanted her to come home when she was on FaceTime and stuff. So he heard me being upset with her. I was like, listen, I told you that you were okay to go do this and you didn't follow the rules. And now I want you to come home. So either I can come get you or he can bring you home. She's like, well, we're already in the car, so I'll just have him bring me home. Okay, fine. So he brought her home and he pulled in to just like the end of my driveway. And she got out and came in the house. And instantly I had a gut feeling. My stomach turned and I did not like that. When she came inside, I was like, where's Tyson? Like, why did he drop you off like that? And she was like, oh, well, I don't know. I asked him to. And just the way that she responded to me, I knew that she didn't ask him to and that she was covering for him already. And I didn't like that.
But when Emali got pregnant, did Heidi think it might work out?
No, I was hoping that something was going to go south and he was going to ditch her, to be honest. When she got pregnant and she said that she wanted to be with him or whatever, I was really hoping that he was going to back out. Instead, he used the pregnancy and the baby as a means of control.
And for her new daughter, Emali had chosen the name Eliana years earlier.
We did a gender reveal, which she did with her sister. We did invite Tyson to the gender reveal. We did it at our house. We did a barbecue and everything. And we had it Facebook live streaming. And of course, he didn't show up. He gave some type of excuse on why he couldn't be there. But Emali and Eva did the gender reveal. And they found out it was a girl. And she was excited. And she's like, I know what I'm going to name her. It's going to be Eliana May. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, you've had that name picked out since you were 8.
And even though she was now a mother at a very young age, Emali was a natural.
She fell right into it perfectly. Obviously, she was a teenager. She was young. So there were struggles. And she did have postpartum. So that was a struggle as well. But she always made sure that Eliana came first and that Eliana was taken care of consistently, whether it was her asking me to take care of her or she was taking care of her or she brought her to her sister's room so she could take a shower. Like, she was always taken care of.
Early on, Heidi suspected that Emali was being abused.
I had always kind of suspected at least some type of emotional abuse because he was always trying to control everything that she was doing. Like, we went to Georgia right after the baby was born to see my family because my grandmother wasn't doing well. And we wanted her to be able to meet Eliana. And he was very controlling about how often she was on the phone. And he was constantly sending her messages and texting her and accusing her of things. That was right after the baby was born. That was in July. It was the end of August, beginning of September. Emali had made plans to go to Popham Beach with her friends, and I had the baby. I was going to meet her at Popham Beach with her friends. She was going earlier than I was because I had something that I had to do, and she ended up calling me from a police officer's phone. I answered the phone, and she's like, Mommy, it's Emali. And I'm like, what? Whose phone are you calling me from? And she's like, I'm calling you from a police officer's phone. And I was like, what do you mean? Why are you calling me from a cop's phone? And she's like, well, it's a long story. I'm at Popham Beach and my friends left and I need you to come get me. And I'm like, okay, what? I tried to get it out of her, but she didn't want to talk and she's just asked me to just show up. So I drove all the way to Popham. Her knuckles were bright red. She had bruises on her legs. She had bruises on her arms. I asked her what the hell happened. And she said that she made plans to go to Popham with her friends and he knew about it and it was fine until she was getting ready to leave. And then he didn't want her to go. And she said that she told him that she was going anyway because her friends were already on their way. And he was telling her, no, you weren't going, so on and so forth. And they just got into a physical altercation and he put a pillow over her head and was punching her in the thigh. I asked her where her phone was and she said he took it from her and he threw it and he wouldn't let her take it when she left the house. And I was like, okay, well, that's not his phone. You are not his property. He doesn't get to tell you that you can't leave, and she didn't even live there. She was just, she stayed there a lot because it was more of a fight and it was more draining for her to not be there than it was for her to be there. And on the way home, she used my phone to call his mother. And listening to the conversation with his mother, I found out that his mother knew that he had put his hands on my daughter. I took the phone away from Emali and I asked her what the hell she was thinking. The only response that she gave to me was that they're putting their hands on each other. I said, self-defense doesn't count as putting your hands on each other. And either way, your son is 3 times the size of my daughter. And you just allowed that to happen. She just kept asking to talk to Emali. And I said, no, you're not talking to Emali. You're talking to me. Emily's 16 years old. You don't get to talk to her anymore. Now you're talking to me. And I was fuming. I was so angry. I went to the courthouse to try to get her to fill out a restraining order. And we started to fill out the paperwork, and she got upset and she was like, Mommy, this doesn't feel right. It feels wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. And I was like, you should be doing this. He put his hands on you. Like, what happens if he gets mad at the baby when she gets older? Like, you have to, like, this is something we have to do. So she refused to talk to the judge and stuff. So then I contacted the police and we went to his house and I made her get all of her stuff out of the house. His mother was there. I asked the police officers if I were to fill out a protection order because she was 16, I was like, can I fill out a protection order with her being 16 and keep her away from him? And they said that I could do that. It was within my rights. However, if she decided to leave me and go to his house, they wouldn't be able to hold him accountable for breaking the restraining order.
So Emali stayed with him, and eventually they kind of had their own place.
His grandparents both passed away, and the trailer is going through probate court. So I guess his mother asked him if the two of them could live there for the winter so that the house wouldn't like freeze up and like the pipes wouldn't break and, the roof cave in, all that kind of stuff while it was going through probate. When they first moved over there, I would go over quite frequently. Like I'd bring dinner or I'd bring Eliana home and, they'd put her to bed and then I'd leave so that she wouldn't freak out that I was leaving. But then at the past 6 months or so, every time I went there, she'd call me and be like, Mommy, can you get me McDonald's? Or Mommy, can you bring me this? Or Mommy, can you bring me that? Can you come get Ellie? Or can you drop Ellie off? Whatever. She would always meet me outside. Even like dead middle of winter, snowstorm, like didn't matter. She'd meet me outside. And this is a girl that hated the cold. I kept asking her, like, why don't you want me in the house? And she just, it's just a little bit messy. And I don't want to deal with it right now. It's just messy. I don't want to deal with it right now. I think that she wasn't allowed to have me in the house. I think that he was telling her that he didn't want me there, but she still had to keep me to some degree because I'm her mom. You know what I mean? And she depended on me to take care of Eliana and stuff.
But what frustrated Emali is that Tyson would never allow her to go anywhere.
The most recent time was she made plans to go to the trampoline park with one of her friends. It was great until that day, and he woke up, like they were leaving at like 12:30. He woke up at like 9, and she's like, hey, don't forget, I'm going to the trampoline park with Chloe. The girl's name was Chloe. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. Just I have to go to, because it was on the weekend. So like the fuel company wasn't open because they had ran out of heating fuel. So he was like, it's fine. I just got to go to the store and get some K1 before you leave. And she's like, okay, well, it's 9:00. Like, I'm not leaving for 3.5 more hours. And he's like, okay, that's fine. Just remind me that I got to go. And she's like, why don't you just go get in the shower and go now? So I don't have to remind you, and then 10:00 rolls around. He still hasn't gone. And she's like, hey, don't forget, like, I'm going to the trampoline park with Chloe today. We're leaving at 12:30. He's like, yeah, don't forget, I still have to go get fuel. And she's like, yeah, you've been awake for an hour and you haven't gone. They only had one vehicle. So, 11:00 rolls around and she's like, I'm leaving in an hour and a half, and he's like, okay, I got to go get fuel. And she's like, okay, you've been up for 2 hours. Go get fuel. Like, well, I don't know what you're doing. So then 12:00 rolls around and she's going to leave in a half an hour. And then, she's like, are you going to go get fuel? Because I got to leave. I'm leaving in 30 minutes. I have to meet Chloe at 1. Then it was this big, long, knockdown, drag out fight. It was yelling, screaming. She had called me that day to come pick up the baby because she was just exhausted. After trying to fight for the right to leave the house, she just wanted to go to bed.
That was one of the final tipping points. Heidi explained to Emali that this is narcissistic, controlling behavior that she doesn't have to put up with. And Emali finally started to realize it herself.
She's like, yeah, I know, Mommy. Like, I want to get out. Like, I want to leave. We can't stay in this house all the time. And I look like an idiot because I'm making these plans with people. And then I have to turn around and make some bullshit excuse because I don't want to make myself look bad, but I don't want to make myself look worse by making it known that I'm being controlled by some dude. So I have to come up with some excuse. Like, I have to lie to my friends. And I just don't like it. I want to be able to go out and have fun. I want to watch Eliana have fun and grow and make friends, and I can't. Then she decided that she was going to take a weekend. She stayed here for the weekend, and he blew up her phone. She had a friend come over, and they hung out for a while, somebody that she hadn't talked to for quite some time. That was the first weekend that she was back here. And then she ended up going back over there because he was blowing up her phone. He was like, I promise I'm going to get a job. I have an interview on Monday.
But somehow the interviews, if they even actually happened, never resulted in a job. So one Monday morning, Emali got out of the house for a bit and called Heidi, and they formed a plan for her to leave. And the plan involved Emali's sister, Eva.
So she said, well, I have to work today and I have to work tomorrow, but I have Wednesday off. So Wednesday, I'll take Eliana to daycare and then I'll go back to the house and I'll pack up all our stuff and I will move home. So Emali and Eva were talking to their father about staying at his house in Sabatis and paying him, the mortgage and stuff like that. That way they had their own place and they could kind of live like adults, but still have their parents as their cushion if they needed it. And it would have just made sense. And that was the whole plan. Emily's father was okay with it as long as the girls could prove their financial ability to pay the mortgage and pay the light bill and that kind of thing. And as long as Tyson didn't live there. That was the plan, is for her to move in here. And then once the Sabatis house was completely, because he had other people living there, once they were out and it was ready for the girls were going to move in. So Wednesday morning, she was supposed to be getting her stuff together, getting it ready to come home, and then come home.
And you were supposed to pick up Ellie from daycare.
Initially, because I knew him enough to know what he was going to try to pull with her. So I didn't offer to pick up Eliana initially, because the plan was for her to drop Eliana off, go back to Minot, get their stuff, and have their stuff done and picked up before Eliana had to get picked up for daycare. So I told her that I had to work. I mean, I could have gotten out earlier, which I did because I ended up picking up Eliana. But initially I told her that I couldn't get her because I had to work. So that was me leaving that as a motivation for her to get her stuff out of the house as soon as possible. So she texted me throughout the day and asked me like, oh, can you get Ellie? So on and so forth. There's a couple of times I did ignore the text messages because I wanted to, again, keep that motivation for her. Like if I was busy at work, then she was going to get stressed out enough to hurry and leave some things and go get the baby. But then I was in a meeting and she FaceTimed me and then she FaceTimed me and then she FaceTimed me. So finally I answered the FaceTime and I was like, honey, what do you need? And she's like, Mommy, I need you to pick up Eliana. And I was like, honey, I told you I'm working. I can't pick her up. Like, why can't you pick her up? You have the day off. You're at Tyson's picking up your stuff. Like, what's going on? Like, why can't you pick? And she's like, Mommy, it's just taking longer than I thought for me to get my stuff. And I was like, okay, whatever. Listen, I want you to relax, calm down. I want you to have as much time as you need because you're making the right decision. So yes, I'll figure it out. I can go get Eliana and then I'll see you later. Like I'll see you when you get home. And she's like, okay, thank you so much. It makes me feel so much better. I could see her, like she had the phone propped up and she was actively going through clothes in the living room and putting them in bags.
So she was feeling that pressure. She had to get out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. I could have continued to keep the pressure on her and forced her to go get Eliana, but that's not really the kind of person that I am. I knew that leaving was enough of a stress. So I could see it in her face and I could see it in her body language and stuff that she was just like, she was freaking out. And I didn't want her to make the decision of not leaving because I denied going to get Ellie. So eventually I was like, yeah, okay, fine. I would just calm down, relax, just get your stuff. I'll go get Eliana. And then that was the last time I heard from her. Well, honestly, that's where I start to get super emotional because I was on my way to get Eliana and I was at a stoplight and I texted Emali and so Eliana has to take a medication at night because she has an issue with her bowels. And the only way to get the medication into her, and the only way for the medication to work is to get it into her all at one time. And it has to be like 6 to 8 ounces of liquid, like just down the hatch, and getting a 2-year-old to drink that much at one time is almost impossible. So she still has a bubby, a bottle at night with milk with her medication in it. I didn't have any more. When Emali left on Sunday, she took Eliana's last bubby. So I was at a stoplight and I texted her and I said, hey, you have her bub, so that it would remind her to grab it. Typically with those types of things, I would get an immediate response back. The other thing was that I didn't leave my job until 5:15. My job is further away from daycare than my house. And Emali would always check my location starting at like 4:50 to see where I was at. And then if I hadn't left my house or left my job by 5 o'clock, she was texting me. So when it was 5:15 and I didn't get a text message asking where I was, I thought that was a little bit weird. But then I was at a stoplight and I asked her, and I said, you have her bubby. And I didn't get a response back. I thought that was super weird because she would have checked my location and said, okay, I'll bring it, but where are you? Why aren't you at daycare yet? Because it was like 5:24. I got home and I cooked dinner and I still hadn't heard from her. I texted her and asked her if she was coming home, and I didn't get anything back. So I texted her again. I was like, hello, like, are you okay? What's going on? Obviously, she didn't answer me. So then I started reaching out to her friends and stuff like that when it got, 9, 10 o'clock at night. But when she didn't answer me when I asked her about her bub, that was the very first time that it, like, in my head, I was like, what is she doing? But I was like, oh, maybe she's really busy or what have you. But she didn't ask me, like, if I brushed Eliana's teeth or not. She didn't ask me, like, what time she went to bed. She didn't ask me to FaceTime her before she went to bed, like she did every single time I had her. It was weird. And then, her friend went over to the house and she called me and said that she said, Heidi, something isn't right. I said, what do you mean? It's just like both of the cars are in the driveway because Emali had purchased a vehicle. She said both of the cars are in the driveway. All of the lights are on in the house. The curtains are drawn. So I can't see anything, but the door is locked and nobody's coming to the door. I said, well, are you just like lightly knocking or are you like pounding like a man on the door? And she's like, I'm pounding and I'm screaming and nobody's coming to the door. She's like, do you think that I should call the police? And I was like, well, what does your gut say? And she's like, my gut tells me that I need to call the police. I said, okay, hang up the phone and call the police. Like, if Emali, she should have answered my calls. She should have answered my FaceTime. She should have picked up the phone, answered the door. Like, she can be mad, I guess, that the cops show up if she gets angry that we called the cops. She'll have to get over it. So Kyra called and did a wellness check. But they said that they were going to be a while because they were really, really busy. So she left. They got to the house around midnight. According to the police officer that I spoke with that gave me the news, he said that when the police went at midnight, they were full sirens in the driveway, flashing lights. They're on the PA system. They're pounding on the door, but they weren't able to make contact. But because they were unclear about the owners of the house or what have you, I don't know the exact legalities behind it, but they didn't force entry. They called Kyra because Kyra was the one that initially did the wellness check. So they called her back and told her all of this, and she called me and told me what they had said and said that like the police officers were going to go back and they were going to call her when they did. And it was like an hour or so after I talked to her. I asked her if she had heard anything, and she said no.
Did you have any thought about going over there yourself at that point?
I did. I wanted to go over there initially anyway, but I had the baby. I would have had to have waken her up and put her in the car, and then, you know what I mean? So it made more sense to me to have a friend go over just in case, say everybody was okay. Emily would have been absolutely fuming that I woke her baby up and put her in the car and drove her over there. I called at 5:50.
This is the next morning you're talking about.
Correct, yeah. At 5:50, I called the sheriff's office, and I talked to the dispatch, and I said, you guys, my daughter's friend called a welfare check on her at around midnight, and you weren't able to make contact, and you're supposed to go back this morning. Like, I haven't heard anything. She hasn't heard anything. I need to know what's happening. Like, I haven't heard from her. I haven't heard from you guys. Like, what's going on? So he put me through to an officer, and the officer told me what he told me at that point was that he had just got on duty and he read the report from the previous wellness check, and he was alarmed at the fact that there was so much happening and they didn't make contact, like nobody came out. He's like, so I'm down the street from the house. I've pulled over so I don't drop our call, and I'm waiting for another officer to come meet me here, and then we're going to go try to make contact again, and then if we don't make contact, we'll look into forced entry. It was hours. Like, I was freaking out. I called my brother. I called Emily's father. I was hoping that somebody would give me some type of hope that something wasn't, like, my gut was wrong. Because even though I didn't know, like, I'm a mom, I could feel that there's something that wasn't right. From the time that I texted her that she forgot her bub, that she had her bub, I knew something was wrong. But I couldn't prove it. I couldn't, there's a mother's intuition, and then there's going overboard, I went to work still because, like, what am I going to do? Sit home and stare at the wall? I'm waiting for a phone call from the police or from my daughter or from something. So the only thing that I know how to do is just my job. So I still went to work, went about my day. So then they came and they gave me the news, and I wasn't driving. I couldn't drive. I left my car at work, and I got in the cruiser, and I got in the cruiser with the officer that I had talked to on the phone earlier in the morning. And he said that he wasn't on the side of the road waiting for an officer. He was at the house in full SWAT uniform with a team, just about to force entry when my call came in. So he walked down to the end of the driveway and shut his radio off so that I wouldn't hear anything happening, and told me the story that he told me. And then he went and forced entry and found them.
So he came and gave you this news at work?
Mm-hmm.
How do you even absorb those words?
You don't? I mean, even now, it's still not absorbed. Like, when I think about, like, when I see her pictures and stuff, like, there's still so many things that happen. Like, I see things on Facebook, and I was like, oh, I want to screenshot. Like, there's a boy that was, like, obsessed with her that when we lived up north, and him and his new girlfriend are having a baby or something. And my immediate intuition was to screenshot it and send it to her. And I couldn't. So I screenshotted it and sent it to Eva and told her that I instantly wanted to send it to Emali. And even though now I go about my life and I take care of Ellie and I take care of my daughter and my son and my house and I have my job and I'll see pictures and stuff and as crazy as it sounds, I'll forget that she's gone. I'll go to call her on my way home from work, or I'll go to send her a text to check on her or something, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, she's not going to answer me. Obviously I know she's not here, but I just get so into my daily stuff. I forget. And then remembering it just kills me again. Hearing the news that my daughter was taken from me completely broke me. The only thing that I know how to do as a human is to just swallow it and keep going, because I can't wallow in my own self-pity. I have to push forward and speak for her because she's not here to speak for herself anymore. The most surreal thing or unreal thing is that his whole argument with her leaving him and his whole guilt that he used on her was that he didn't want, or that it wasn't fair to Eliana to have to grow up in a two-parent, a split parent household, a split household. That always made her feel bad for the baby, because he's like, well, how do you think that Eliana is gonna do later on in life when she has 2 Christmases and 2 birthdays, and we're arguing over school vacations, and shouldn't she just have a normal life where both of her parents live together, and and that's how he kept her from leaving for so long. Then when she finally told me about it, I was like, honey, people, you can live a separated life and have Eliana still be happy. You don't have to live miserably and live in a house with her potential father just because it's her potential father, just to have 2 parents under one roof. That doesn't make a happy child. Love and affection and experiences and understanding make happy children. And right now, the only people that are allowed to love Eliana is me, you, him, and his mom sometimes. Nobody else can be around her because he doesn't allow her out of the house, and that's not fair to her.
The police investigated. What did they determine had actually happened?
So the only information that I have is that the only thing that they had said was that he shot her in the head and then he turned the gun on himself. When we went to see her at the funeral home before the funeral, they had done their best to cover up her wound. It just looked like she had bumped her head. We did an open casket at first because we wanted to make sure that everybody could see her and touch her and kiss her and say goodbye, looking like her, because it was so sudden that we didn't want to take that away from her friends, because she had so many people that loved her. And Eva went in to see her, and she came back out and talked to the funeral director, and she was like, okay, so you had to flat iron her hair, and you had to put fake eyelashes on her because she was too bougie, and you have to do that. She was listing all these things that she wanted the funeral home to do to make her look like her. I sent the kids to Portland to buy her outfit, and instead of being the traditional, flower sundress or whatever, because apparently when I spoke to the funeral home, she had too many abrasions on her body to have a lot of exposure. We got her some gray sweatpants and a gray zip up hoodie and a pink crop top because that's what she would have worn anyway. And that's what we had them put her in. I mean, we wanted her to look as normal and as much like Emily as possible. The police didn't give me any details as far as anything that had potentially physically happened before he took her life, but the funeral home, they tried to be as discreet as possible, but my assumption based off of what the funeral home had stated and the situation is that he beat the hell out of her before he shot her.
I would imagine that part of what makes this difficult is how senseless it is.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense because he's like, oh, well, we don't want Eliana to grow up in a house with parents living separately. So, hell, let's just take both of them away from her. Like, what? Why? Why would you do that?
Trying to apply logic to someone who thinks the way he did, there's no way.
No. This guy didn't just flip a switch and have this thought process and have this way of thinking. He was wired this way, and it was ignored and enabled for his entire life. He should have been medicated. He should have been institutionalized. He should have been something. Some type of treatment needed to happen, like way earlier. Something should have been taken care of. He should have been treated well before he met my daughter.
You've done a couple of things to kind of keep Emily's memory alive. What are those things?
Well, one of the things is she had a tattoo on her bicep that was Eliana's birth flower. So what I did was I got a tattoo of 2 flowers on my bicep. One of them is Emily's birth flower, and one of them is Emily's death flower. And I put her name in the stem. And then I put the same tattoo that she had on her bicep for Eliana. I put that on my forearm, but there's voids through it so that it's like wind. So it's like Emily's birth flower and death flower. And then there's wind coming down and like wiping away the tattoo that Emily had on her bicep. And then I have her thumbprint and Eva's thumbprint together in a heart on my wrist that has her ashes in it. Eva has the same thing. Eva has my thumbprint and Emily's thumbprint in a heart on her forearm. I have the year 2005 tattooed on the back of my elbow because this past year on my birthday, Emily went and got a tattoo of 1985 on the back of her elbow, which is the year that I was born. And that was her birthday present to me, was her tattoo of my birth year. As silly as it sounds, she sent it to me. I was at work. I had to work a double that day. She sent me a picture of 1985 on the back of her elbow, and it made me cry.
Yeah, that you had to be delighted to see that.
I was so happy. And also, even though she was so young, a few years ago, she was scrolling through Facebook and she saw a video of a burial option, which was you take a whole body and it gets put in like a pod. You grow a tree out of the pod. And she brought it to me and she showed it to me. She's like, Mommy, this is what I want to do. If anything ever happens to me, like, when I'm old and I die, I want to be made into a weeping willow tree. So nobody ever thinks about what their kid wants when they die, like how they want to be put to rest. But she was always like, I don't know, it's so crazy that there's so many things that happened throughout the 19 years of her being alive that made me make the decisions that I've made. Like, Maine doesn't have the option to do a whole body pod. And we do have like green cemeteries where we could make a tree or what have you, and it's protected, but they're very far away from where anybody lives. So we split her ashes. We made a living urn which is something that Maine does offer. So we have some of her ashes in one urn that's going to go into her plot that is in a cemetery. So she's protected there. And then we have some ashes that are in a living urn that we are going to bury with a weeping willow tree across the street from the cemetery that she's going to be buried at, because that's the house that her father owns. So the plan is that we're going to put her tree in the front yard. Eva is going to be living there. He built her an apartment in the basement. So she's going to be living at that house for now. And she's going to take care of her sister's tree along with everybody else. Obviously, she's got friends and she's got friends and she's got friends. She's got so many friends. So everybody's going to come help, take care of the tree. Then when, Eva's family is all grown, then the house is going to go to Eliana. So Eliana is going to have the house and with her mom in the front yard and across the street.
You're making it a point to keep Emily's memory alive and to get this story out there. What's your incentive for that? Why are you doing that?
I can't allow her to fade away. She wasn't that type of person. She wasn't one to kind of be sitting in the background and be forgotten about. So I can't allow her to be forgotten about. And the other part of my motivation is making sure that this doesn't happen to other people. A huge percentage of Maine homicides are domestic homicides, and there are so many different things that can be done to help prevent them from happening and to reduce the high percentage that we have. It's like, I've heard a couple of different numbers. I've heard 49%. I've heard 51% of Maine homicides are domestic homicides. If I can save a life using Emily's story, then I've succeeded. And I've already saved a life that I know about in New York from Maine. A young lady wrote me and told me her story and told me that after she saw my inside interview on YouTube, she packed up her stuff and she left before this happened to her. She felt like she was in a similar situation and everything just pinpointed what she was going through. And she was pregnant with a baby boy, and she wanted to make sure that she got out of her situation before she met the same demise that my daughter did. So I know that I've already saved her, and that is a success to me. But if I can continue to save lives and raise awareness and get these victims to understand that they're victims and get them to understand that it's okay and to stop being embarrassed and stop making excuses and to, stand up and hold your head high and keep your voice, don't let them take it, then that's my mission. That's my motivation, is empowering these victims.
And from a practical standpoint, it seems like if the police were involved on the day she was trying to leave, that could have changed everything.
It would have. It 100% would have. There's no way that he would have pulled a gun on her. He wouldn't have put his hands on her if the police were there.
That's a big thing.
It is a huge thing. A huge thing. Even if there was another type of person there. Me, I don't know. It probably wouldn't have changed. My kids probably would have lost their sister and their mom. If it was one of my children, because I had actually told her that my son got out of school early that day so she could go get him to help her. I'm glad that she didn't, because I could have lost 2 children. But if it was some type of official person, it wouldn't have ended the way that it ended. Things would have been very, very different. However, the reason why the police weren't there is because of Emily's fear of getting into trouble because of their living situation, because they were living in a trailer that was going through probate court. So she was afraid that she and or her assailant would have gotten in trouble for squatting. Obviously, she didn't want to get in trouble for squatting, but she didn't want him to get in trouble for squatting either, for a couple of different reasons. One was because she didn't want to be the reason for him to technically be homeless, because then that would have just given him more fuel to continue to treat her poorly and to reach out to her and to make her feel guilty for him not being able to have a relationship with Eliana because he has no place to live, so on and so forth. And 2, if he had to go somewhere, he would have gone to his mother's house, which would have put him closer to my house. So she didn't want that either. she didn't want to bring his drama here because this was her safe space, even though she knows that she would have been safe, even though he would have been closer, because I would have called the police. And he knew that, and she knew that, and she just didn't want to have to bring anything to that point. So she was just trying to take care of it on her own. That's the thing that a lot of victims do, is if there's any type of like illegal activity happening in the house, like if their assailant is using drugs or, I don't know, illegal reptiles, because that happens sometimes in a house. They don't want their assailant to get in trouble, because then it turns into, well, it's their fault because they called the police there, so on and so forth. And it just extends their abuse even after they're out. What I want to do, and what I'm working with the Maine Attorney General's office with, is there's a lady named Regina that I'm spitballing all of my ideas at, to try to change processes and possibly create different departments within the police force to help ease the pain of getting these victims out of these situations, even if they're not technically ready to leave. I don't want anybody to wait to reach out for help until they're to a point where they're just so beaten and battered and backed into a wall that they have to leave to feel like they're going to survive. In all of the stages of abuse, I want to create more options for people than calling a 1-800 number and speaking with someone. I know that the domestic violence hotline is a huge help, but it's a lot of numbers to have to dial, and it's still a conversation. And a lot of these victims aren't able to have phone conversations because their assailant is there, and they're watching, and they're listening, and they're paying attention to every single thing, because these victims are their property. They're things. And if other people know how they're behaving and their property is trying to find help, well, that removes their control from them. And they don't allow that to happen. So I've thrown a bunch of ideas at her, and she's bringing it up to the proper channels to see what we can do and how things can be tweaked and how things can be set in place to make it easier for these guys to get help. And I've also started the process of getting domestic violence license plates. Just like we have breast cancer license plates, we have, the animal shelter license plates. With our rate of domestic homicides being so high, why there hasn't been a domestic violence license plate made before now, it blows my mind. How we've never done that to raise money, to raise awareness. Like, if we have the funds, then we can pay we can pay people. We can pay someone to go sit in a house and not be threatening like a police officer. Like just a regular clothed person that's armed with like a taser or a pepper spray or some type of neutralizing non-deadly weapon, to just sit on a couch, sit in a chair in a corner, and allow these victims to work out these processes. But have these people be able to get paid for it, because that's a big problem. They can't afford to live and volunteer their time to do those things because there's too many situations. So having a paid position, I think, is very, very vital to start saving lives in the state.
Yeah, it's interesting. You doing this are going to be saving lives. Maybe you already have, but yet the simple thing like the funds from an extra wording on a license plate could also save lives.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely got to get that word out there. And we'll have links to, like you mentioned, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They do a lot of good too. There's a lot of different ways, different directions to attack this issue. What's your favorite memory with Emali?
My favorite memory, honestly, is one of the things that I hated the most. And
okay.
I know that sounds crazy, but it was the phone calls. I miss the phone calls. I hated waking up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning to my phone ringing. Or like I would be going and taking, like it would be a day that I didn't have Ellie, or I had to pick her up at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I got out of work and I was just relaxing, and I'd lay down and take a nap at like noon, 1 o'clock, and my phone would ring right before I went to fall asleep. And she would just want to talk, sometimes about super important stuff, and she had to hear things from my perspective to make decisions or what have you. And sometimes it was just boredom. She just wanted to have, somebody on the phone there are so many times I was like, Renee, what do you want? She said, Mommy, I'm pumping gas. Okay, you're grown. You can pump gas. Well, no, what if I get kidnapped? I promise you, if you FaceTime them the way that you FaceTime me, they will bring you home, honey. Like, you're gonna be okay. But I'd always stay on the phone with her. I never hung up on her. I never made her feel like she actually really couldn't call me, which is why she called me constantly. But that's my favorite memory. I know there's a lot of memories that have that, that happened with, but that's definitely my favorite thing. I mean, if we're talking about like one situation, it was watching her give birth and seeing her reaction.
That must have been incredible.
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. Like just being there and supporting her and, just watching her take her baby like from the womb and just like, it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. And that was where I saw her actually, like that's where I saw her change. She went from being a girl to being a woman at 16 years old.
I appreciate you coming on, telling the story.
I appreciate you reaching out for sure.
Heidi and I recorded this conversation only about 2 months after Emali had been murdered. Her grief is still very fresh, but she didn't want to wait. As you heard, Heidi wants to help people recognize the signs of domestic violence and get out before it's too late. And there's a plot twist in this story. Since Emali's death, Heidi's been taking care of her little girl, Eliana. But someone else has filed to request custody of Ellie, and that person is Tyson's mother. Yes, the mother of the man who killed Emali wants to get Emily's 2-year-old daughter. Of course, Heidi's fighting this. The first step is a DNA paternity test to find out if Tyson was even the father. Right now, as I record this, that test result has not yet come back. For Heidi, this will be an expensive battle for custody. If you'd like to help her with this, there's a GoFundMe set up, and I'll have a link to that in the episode notes at whatwasthatlike.com/184. And Heidi's in the Facebook group, so if you'd like to ask a question or drop her a message of encouragement, you can do that at whatwasthatlike.com/Facebook. If you like this episode, you might like the episode I did with Bill Mitchell. Bill lost his daughter Kristen to domestic violence, and now he's raising awareness through his book and his podcast called When Dating Hurts. That's episode 99, titled Bill Got a Dreaded Phone Call. Graphics for this episode were created by Bob Bretz. Full episode transcription was created by James Lai. And here we are at this week's listener story. If you have a story that you can tell in about 5 to 10 minutes, send it in. It can be funny, sad, amazing, whatever. Just something interesting that happened to you. Record it on your phone and email it to me at scott@whatwasthatlike.com. This week's story is from a woman who finally figured out why she was feeling so terrible in Ecuador. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.
A few years ago, I took a trip to the Galapagos Islands. It was all organized through G Adventures, which is a small tour group operator. So all I had to do was get my flights. And because they organized everything, I did not do the kind of research I would normally do for a trip, which turned out to be a huge problem. The trip to the Galapagos went well, except for a baby sea lion bumping into my eye mask, something they commonly do to be playful, resulting in a bruise on my nose. On the way back, I had a 24-hour layover in Quito, which did not happen on the way there. I arrived in the city in the evening and wandered around taking in the sights the next morning with a few people from our group who were also on some layovers. I started to not feel good around lunchtime. My stomach felt off and I had a headache. I felt really tired and a little lightheaded. I rested in the hotel lobby for a few hours, then headed to the airport on my own for my 5:30 flight. I remember feeling really weird in the cab, like even though the driver wasn't driving fast, things felt like they were rushing past and were a little blurred. I also started to feel like I couldn't breathe. Even recounting this right now, I need to stop and take some deep breaths, remembering that awful feeling. I would take large gulps of air and my chest would hurt, but I would only get a very brief feeling of relief before struggling again. I was dizzy and nauseous, and when I got out of the cab, I even wobbled a little bit. Moving very slowly, I walked into the airport. I felt confused, and I had to keep checking my ticket for the airline. I found the line to check in and got into it, although still not feeling very sure about it. I sat on my suitcase whenever I could, and I kept struggling to get air. A wave of fatigue came over me, and I closed my eyes whenever I could. I noticed a door to the far left that was clearly only for staff, and I wondered if I should go ask for help. But I was terrified that I would miss my flight, and also just really scared about what could happen. I started to sweat a little bit, and I felt my heart racing. When I finally made it to the counter, the agent looked at me a little strangely, but she checked me in. Somehow, I made it through the airport to security, through security, and then down to my gate. I just kept telling myself, just get to the gate, just get to the gate, just get to the gate. I thought if I could at least do that, if something happened to me, I would be near my flight. It was not a rational thought, but it was what I was thinking. Across from the gate, there was a tiny little restaurant, just a counter where you could order food. I thought maybe I needed to eat something, so I bought some French fries, and I sat and tried to eat them. I could only take a few bites. I then went and bought some water and tried to drink that, but that made me feel really nauseous. I can't remember how long I had to wait for the flight, at least an hour, probably longer. My symptoms didn't worsen, but they didn't improve either. The worst part was the breathing. I just could not catch my breath. I had never experienced anything like that before. I went back and forth in my head about asking for help. I knew something was really wrong, but the fear of missing the flight home and being stuck there was scarier. I was overwhelmingly tired and slumped in a seat with my eyes closed, which also helped with the dizziness. I told myself to stay calm, that everything would be okay, and that I would be on the plane soon. Finally, it was time to board. I waited until the line was almost gone so that I would not have to stand for too long. I remember gripping my backpack so tight, my hands sweating, swaying a little as I made my way down the ramp to the plane, holding onto the railing. The confusion had cleared up a little while I was waiting at the gate, probably because I didn't need to think about anything. But when I tried to find my seat, I started to feel confused again, checking and double-checking my boarding pass. The numbers were a little blurred, and I stumbled a little as I shuffled down the aisle. Breathe, just breathe, I kept telling myself. I found my seat and settled in. It was then that I realized that the air was blowing, just in general, that hissing sound in the plane, but also from my individual air fan above my head. It felt good, and I felt my lungs expand a little. I tilted my head up and just sucked in that oxygen, noticing that I was feeling better and better. By the time the plane took off, I was feeling almost normal again. When I could breathe and think clearly, it hit me that it must have been altitude sickness. I asked the flight attendant what the altitude was in Quito, and she said just over 9,000 feet. Had I done my homework, I would have known that and prepared myself. Knowing how serious altitude sickness can get, I felt both scared and relieved that I had gotten through it. Had I been there longer than a day, I would definitely have needed to get medical help. I love to travel, and I've been all over the world, but even if I go through a tour company now, I always Google every single place to check the altitude. Can't let that experience happen to me again.